It started as just another stop on a long highway stretch. A group of bikers pulled into a truck stop, their roaring engines turning heads as they swaggered in. Among the travelers grabbing coffee and refueling, one woman stood out, not because she tried to, but because the bikers made her their target. They assumed she'd be an easy mark, maybe someone to intimidate or push around for fun. What they didn't know was that this woman was not who they thought she was. The confrontation began innocently enough. A few comments, a laugh, but things quickly escalated. Her calm response caught them off guard, but it was what she did next that left the bikers completely stunned. Suddenly, the tables were turned in a way no one saw coming. Stick around because this is one story where appearances were deceiving, and this truck stop encounter became unforgettable. As the bikers leaned in, their confidence was palpable. They were used to getting their way, especially in places like this, quiet truck stops where they could push boundaries without much resistance. The woman, however, remained steady. She was wearing a leather jacket, nothing flashy, but something about her demeanor hinted at a quiet strength. She wasn't flustered, not even when the leader of the group started raising his voice to draw attention. Other travelers began to take notice, whispering amongst themselves but keeping their distance. The tension in the air was heavy, and even the bikers started to sense something was off. One of them muttered something about leaving, but the leader waved him off, determined to see this through. The woman didn't back down. Instead, she smiled, a calm, knowing smile that hinted she had seen this kind of thing before. What did she know that they didn't? The leader of the group took a step closer, towering over the woman as he tried to assert his dominance. His voice was sharp, loud enough to make heads turn, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted her stance slightly. Her eyes locked on his with an unsettling calm. It was as if she was waiting for something, some unseen line to be crossed. One of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably, whispering to the man beside him, "This doesn't feel right." But the leader was too far gone, his pride driving him forward. Behind them, a trucker who had been quietly sipping his coffee leaned over to another patron and murmured, "She looks familiar, doesn't she? Like someone you wouldn't want to mess with." The group hadn't noticed the subtle glances being exchanged around the room. The tension was no longer just between them and the woman, it was brewing everywhere. The leader of the bikers smirked, convinced he was still in control, and threw out a challenge meant to humiliate her. But the woman didn't react the way he expected. Instead, she casually placed her coffee on the table beside her, stood a little straighter, and said something low enough that only he could hear. Whatever it was, his face changed in an instant. The smug confidence vanished, replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. He glanced back at his crew, as if seeking reassurance, but they looked just as uneasy. By now, the entire truck stop was on edge. Conversations had stopped, and people were frozen in place, waiting to see what would happen next. The quiet hum of a distant highway was the only sound breaking the silence. Suddenly, the door swung open, and two men stepped in, both wearing uniforms. They scanned the room, their eyes landing directly on the woman. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two uniformed men walked in. They weren't police officers, no badges, no guns. Their crisp uniforms and serious expressions suggested something else entirely. One of them nodded toward the woman, his face unreadable. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "is everything okay here?" The leader of the bikers shifted uneasily, his bravado faltering. "Who are they?" One of his crew muttered under his breath, but no one had an answer. The woman gave a small smile, the same calm, confident look she'd had from the start. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady. But the way she said it made it clear she was the one in control now. One of the men turned his attention to the bikers, his eyes sharp. Gentlemen, we suggest you step outside. His tone left no room for argument. The leader hesitated, torn between standing his ground and obeying, but something told him this wasn't the moment to test his luck. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their leader frozen in place as the tension reached its peak. The woman finally broke her silence, her calm voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I'd listen to them if I were you," she said, her tone firm but not threatening. "You've already pushed your luck." Reluctantly, the leader nodded, signaling to his crew to back off. As they shuffled toward the exit, the woman reached into her jacket pocket. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. She pulled out a badge, official, unmistakable, and flipped it open for just a moment before tucking it back away. The bikers froze mid-step. Their leader turned back, his face pale. He stammered, but she cut him off with a look. "I'm exactly who you don't want to mess with," she said quietly. As the bikers stumbled out the door, the two men in uniforms approached her. One leaned in, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "You handled that well, Agent. Should we follow them?" The woman shook her head. "No need. They've learned their lesson." Then, as if nothing had happened, she picked up her coffee and returned to her seat. The truck stop buzzed with quiet whispers, but no one dared approach her. Outside, the bikers rode off, their engines roaring, but they weren't celebrating. They knew they'd just come dangerously close to crossing the wrong person. As the rumble of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the truck stop slowly returned to normal. Conversations picked up again, but the air was still thick with curiosity and awe. The woman, calm as ever, sipped her coffee, her eyes focused out the window as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. One of the truckers approached cautiously, tipping his hat. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, who are you, really?" She glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Just someone passing through," she replied, her tone light but enigmatic. With that, she stood, left a tip on the counter, and walked out into the sunlight. The uniformed men followed her silently, their presence confirming she was no ordinary traveler. As she climbed into her car and drove off, those left behind couldn't help but wonder about the woman who'd turned a routine truck stop into a story they'd never forget.